Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Ducksy Gaming and the full guide for the Lightning Strike Raider in 3.16. Before we jump into the guide, there's a couple of things I want to point out that are in the video, but the video is quite long. The clip that I showed of the footage is from when I was geared out in 3.15, but it is the character that I league started with. So yes, there is investment in that build, but it's investment that I got from running this character. It's a character that will take you really smoothly through leveling through white, yellow and red maps. If you wanted to have a look at kind of how to go about doing it, there is a playlist on my channel which is called Lightning Strike Act 1 to Maven. We don't actually get to Maven because I have to call the series short, but in 24 hours we get to farming tier 16 maps, and then after about a day and a half we are killing Act 8 A8 Cirrus. This was all done on SSF gear. I'm going to go through the gear that I had on those characters to show you what level of gear you need, but it is impossible for me to recreate what it's going to be like in 3.16 because of all the changes. But this is as best guess as I could give to what it's going to be like, but there's no reason that you cannot league start with this and then take this all the way through to endgame if you wanted to make it your only character. So without further ado, let's jump into the guide. Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Ducksy Gaming and a full guide to the Lightning Strike Raider in 3.16. Now I released quite a few videos around this build in 3.15, but because so much has changed, it was really only right to bring out a whole new build guide starting from scratch for 3.16. Now, as I said, a lot has changed since the last league, and I'm going to attempt to cover as much of this as I can, including changes to gems, mechanics, and defenses. So the guide itself is split up and time-stamped into sections as shown on the screen. So let's jump right in and start with the playstyle and also the pros and cons of the build. Regarding playstyle, Lightning is a really good build that can really ramp up once you get a 5 link and a half decent claw. With minimum to no investment, you can get to early tier red maps, and then with a small investment, you should be clearing your Atlas. It's 100% league start and SSF viable, and it's incredibly fun and fast playstyle. It's a good all-round build that with the right setup can clear everything that was available in 3.15, and I will give in a good go at all the Uber content that's coming out in 3.16. So in regards to pros, it's a really good all-round skill that delivers both excellent single target when we make use of the Vile section of the skill, and it's got really good clear speed with Ancestral Call and also Pierce. Coupled with Onslaught and increased Onslaught effect from the Radio Ascendancy, it's one of the quickest builds around that can be built from a league start scenario. Gear progression is simple and it's not too expensive. It can also be geared up gradually, and with just a 5 link and a few basic bits of gear, you should be getting into red maps really quickly. Now there are a few downsides if you want to look at it that way. To me it's not, but it's really dependent on playstyle. So the first thing is, for a smooth leveling experience, you really need to transition into Lightning Strike once you're in a 5 link and you've got the Vile gem. You can level with the skill, but it's really clunky and it adds a lot of time onto your run. Despite having a projectile portion of the skill, it is melee and it's not suitable for everyone. You have to be comfortable standing in place of bosses, but with the defenses that we pack into the build, this shouldn't be a problem. It doesn't generate tens of millions of DPS, it doesn't do crazy levels of DPS, but it was able to clear all the content last league, and your burst DPS on bosses is really good. So once you get your gear to an endgame standard, you're going to be taking Guardians and Conquerors down in a matter of seconds. And then the last con is it is quite mechanical. Positioning is important to make sure you're hitting with both your melee and your range portion of the skill. And to keep fortify up, we also need to use Vigilant Strike. So before we jump onto the gear, the next thing I want to touch on is leveling. Now there is a guide linked in the video description, which shows the leveling using Spectral Helix. This is 100% the route I'd recommend taking. It's the quickest way to level, and once you get into white maps, it destroys everything on a 4 link and scuffed gear. There's also a written guide on the Path of Exile forum. Again, the link's going to be in the description below. If you have any questions about leveling, use the forum and I'll respond. Now we'll move on to the passive tree and how to build your defenses later with the removal of dodge, but let's firstly touch on the gem links that you want to aim for. So for our main lightning strike skill, your 6th link wants to be foul lightning strike, then inspiration or elemental damage with attacks, increased critical strike support, nightblade support, added cold support, and trinity support. Now these 6 link skills and gems aren't really set in stone. There's lots of different ones that can slot into each other that make very minimal difference in regards to your DPS. So if, for example, you're finding that you can't proc Trinity because of the way your damage is ending up, you can drop Trinity and you can add added lightning. If you find that you don't really need the increased critical strike support because you're getting near 100% chance, you could drop that and add increased lightning. When it comes to inspiration or elemental damage with attacks, it's really going to come down to mana cost. Inspiration is slightly less DPS, but it lowers the mana cost of the skill. If you can, I'd run elemental damage with attacks, but if you find that you're running into mana issues, then run with the inspiration version. This is going to be a 6 link once you've got some hunter gloves with additional strike on them. If you don't have this, you're going to need to drop one of the links for Ancestral Call, and I probably recommend it be the increased critical because that seems to have the least impact on the DPS. So with our auras, because of changes to the tree that we make and the introduction of masteries, we're able to fit in 2 50% auras and the precision and have mana left to be able to attack and proc Assassin's Mark. So the 4 link auras, put them in whatever gear piece you can fit them in, is going to be Grace, Anger, Assassin's Mark and Precision. Assassin's Mark you're going to have to use manually until you get an Assassin's Mark on hit ring. Precision's there to top up our accuracy and critical strike chance. Anger's the biggest increase in DPS that we can get for a 50% skill, and Grace just adds a huge amount of evasion, which obviously adds to the defensive aspect of the build. So the next setup we're going to look at is our Fortify setup. Now in 3.15, Fortify was simple. You use Vigilant Strike, hit an enemy, you then get Fortify for X amount of seconds. Fortify's changed in 3.16 to be done based on the damage that you deal to an enemy's damage threshold. So what we need to do if we want to try and use Vigilant Strike as a Fortify mechanism is put as much damage as we can into those links. The idea is that we maintain quite a high amount of Fortify stacks, but it does work differently to normal Fortify. So if you put Fortify in a melee skill, every time you hit an enemy, it'll add a certain amount of stack to your Fortify. The idea being that if you're constantly hitting enemies, you're going to keep up maximum stacks of Fortify. The way Vigilant Strikes work is it's a one-time application for 8 seconds. So you'll hit with Vigilant Strike, it will look at the damage that you do, and it will give you X stacks of Fortify for 8 seconds. You can't add to those stacks. If you hit with Vigilant Strike again, it overwrites it. So the idea here is that every 8 seconds or so when we're mapping or bossing, we want to be using Vigilant Strike to add some Fortify to us. Now in 3.15, we one-shot with Vigilant Strike, and that was without any damage links. So by adding in LE damage with attacks, Ancestral Call and added cold, it gives our Vigilant Strike a real punch, and it should give us the stacks of Fortify we need to at least make it worthwhile running. But I will revisit this as soon as the league starts and I've tested it in maps. If this doesn't work, I'll put it in the notes to say so. But I'm pretty sure this is going to be worthwhile running over anything else that we might fit in our last 4 link. So we'll now move on to our guard skill. This hasn't changed from 3.14 and 3.15, and it's a cast when damage taken setup with Immortal Call and increased duration. What Immortal Call does is when you get hit, it procs, and it gives you a massive amount of extra mitigation against physical and elemental damage. With increased duration, it just means that effect lasts longer. You don't have to run the levels I do. I want it to proc nearly all the time because I don't have a lot of phys damage reduction. So I keep my cast and damage taken at level 2 and my Immortal Call at level 4. Increased duration, you want to level that all the way to 20. And the last set of skills to cover off is the movement skills. So we're going to need a 2 link of Whirling Blades and faster attacks. This is the way we traverse the map really, get around really quickly. It also means really at end game you don't need to run a Quicksilver Flask because whenever you're moving, you're going to be using Whirling Blades. We need an unlinked Flame Dash just for getting over gaps because Whirling Blades can't do that. It's also probably a better movement skill to use at bosses. And then we just have an unlinked Blood Rage that you really want to be using all the time because it gives us increased movement speed and increased attack speed. Now that will leave you with a few free links and it's really up to you what you do with them. Once I've played the build for a few days, I might find some skills that would go in nicely to complement everything else. But normally, when I get to the juiced up content, I like to have 2 sockets free to run a portal and a cast on death. Yeah, it's a really softcore, wimpy out version of using 2 sockets, but it really helps in things like delirium. If you're in the middle of a heavy delirium and you die, it drops the portal, you go straight back in, you don't lose your place. And it's the same with things like blight. You're going to go straight back into the blight encounter and at least gives you a chance of saving that encounter. And that covers off all of the gems and the links. The way this guide's going to work is I'm going to bring one out maybe a week after the league starts, once I know what my end game gear and links are going to look like, and just revise anything that might have changed. But for now, we'll move on from the gems and links, and we're going to talk about the passive tree and the reworked defenses. So before we dive into the new look tree and pull out a few of the notable sections, let's cover off the defense rework because this is the part that's changed the most in the build. So in 3.15, Ranger Raider was overtuned for defenses. All we needed was acrobatics, elusive and blind, and that pretty much made us close to invincible. Blind has been nerfed really hard. It's still useful for builds like this one that stack evasion, and dodge has been removed entirely, which if we just went into 3.15 with the same tree, we'd have no defenses and we'd get absolutely annihilated. Now there's lots of different options to build defenses. Now that we don't take acrobatics, we don't get that nerf to armor, energy shield and block. The one I went with is evasion, block and spell suppression, and then there's extras thrown in after they all fail to hopefully mitigate the damage. The reason we've gone block is the nodes are very close to us that can get us to block cap, and trying to scale something like armor and energy shield from where we are and get to the keystones, it really spreads our points thin and it would cost a lot of currency to do it. Now this does remove some DPS from the build because before we were literally able to spec into all DPS and life because 5 passive points covered all our defenses. But now we need to use some more points to get those extra layers of defenses. So I'm going to explain every layer of defense and how they coalesce and sort of how they go down the funnel and what you end up with. So we'll start with spell suppression because spell is dealt with differently to attacks. So evasion, which we'll come to after suppression, only applies to attacks and you can't evade spells. So the first layer that's very important is spell suppression, which is a new stat that they've brought in for 3.16, which is meant to replace, in a way, dodge. What suppression does is gives you a percentage to suppress spells. If you're successful, you take 50% less damage from that spell. It actually works out at 53% less damage on our tree because you'll get a small increase to that from the passives that we take. Now we're able to cap this fairly comfortably at 100%, and the eager-eyed of you will notice it's actually 99%. So we need 1% on a shield, but to be honest, I'm happy to live without the 1%. We do have a 10% conditional suppression when we're at full life. So whenever we are at full life, we will get that full 100%. The way we get the suppression is we'll get 40% from Ascendancy, we get percentages from the tree, and then we also get 10% from a new mastery, which gives us 10% suppression if we have evasion on our gloves, helmet, and boots. That was a bit of a tongue twister. We're always going to have evasion on these items because we're stacking evasion. So this means we have a 100% chance to mitigate 53% of spell damage, which is basically the best way we can deal with spells. We could go block. The issue with block is that it's not 100%, so at times you will take that full damage. So we'll move on to the attack damage side of things, and then the first defensive mechanic is going to be evasion, which thanks to the tree and grace, we get around 35 to 40k evasion, and probably even more. The final formula isn't updated on POB, and I don't think the new grace gem numbers are in there either. Once you throw blind into the mix, I think we should comfortably be able to hit at least 85% chance to evade. So to briefly explain, the evasion system isn't RNG like other forms, it's done on what's called an entropy system. And the idea is that if you had, for example, a 95% chance to evade, you'll only get hit once in 20 attacks, and it ensures that that is the case. You won't get hit twice in a row or twice in quick succession. So the way entropy works is it rolls once you take your first attack at you, whether that hits or misses, and it lasts for 100 server ticks, which is 3.33 seconds. If you're not hit at all in this time, then the entropy resets. Some people don't like entropy, but I understand why they've put it in. They've basically made it so you can't get two-shot, and I'm fine with it. If you build high enough evasion, I think the system works absolutely fine. Now, as with other defensive mechanics, these roll after evasion. So we've got our evasion out of the way. Let's say we have 85% chance to evade attacks. That means 15 out of 100 will get through and the evasion fails. The entropy then resets once the evasion fails. So this now will get through that evasion and it hits our next layer of defenses, which is attack block. Now, attack block is just rolled randomly. It's RNG. We should have around 75% chance to block attack damage at endgame. So that means when an attack beats our evasion, it's then only got a 1 in 4 chance of getting through our block. So on average, we're going to block 3 out of 4 hits. Overall, it means adding evasion and block in, we should only get hit once every 35 to 40 attacks. So what happens on those rare occasions where entropy fails and block fails? Well, our next layer is avoidance, which we get from elusive. Elusive at max effect gives 15% chance to avoid damage from hits. Now from the tree and the anomalous Nightblade support gem, we can get 100% increased effect of this, which takes it to 30% chance to avoid damage from hits. However, with elusive, it's like a degrading effect. So when you get elusive and you're max elusive, you're going to have your 30%. But as that ticks down, so does your chance to avoid getting hit. So I'd probably say 15 to 20% is a more reasonable effect to have. So let's go back to the beginning. 85% evasion fails. 75% block fails. We then get to the elusive roll, and let's say it's 20%. We've got a 1 in 5 chance of that hitting us but not causing any damage. 4 out of 5 times that elusive is going to fail, and then we're going to take damage. And with our life pool struggling to hit 5k, you're probably thinking it's curtains for the build, but we've got a lot more layers of defense that are still to come into play. So now the hit has got through and we know we're going to take it and we know we're going to take damage. The first thing the game does is it looks at, has this build got a way to divert any of this damage? And we do. We're going to have around 28% damage converted from physical to elemental. And that's going to be 15 from a Redeemer chest, 8 from a crafted helmet, and then we should be able to pick up 5 from a lethal pride jewel. So before anything else happens, 28% of that physical damage gets set to elemental, and we have 79% resistances, so can easily mitigate that part. So the remaining 72% of us is going to hit us, and this is where damage mitigation is our last hope to reduce that damage even further. So the first thing we have is fortify, which we haven't tested yet, but I'm hoping we can get at least 10% effect, and that would reduce the damage of that hit by 10%. In the endgame setup, we're also going to aim for 3 endurance charges as minimum, as a very large shred of hope actually aligns perfectly with the frenzy and endurance charge nodes at the bottom of the tree. We can also craft minimum endurance charge on a ring and an amulet. This then will mitigate that damage by 12%, along with the slither of armor that we might have. We've also got the option of testing out a stone golem, as the base recovery and survivability of golems has apparently been improved, but whether it would survive with no investment into it needs testing. The end result is that unless we stand in a huge telegraphed attack and have the unfortunate chance that actually it gets through all our defenses, we should survive unless we literally just face tank attacks that we can see coming. You have got the option later on, if you really want to go immortal levels of tanky, you can get an All's Uprising Amulet with Determination reserves no mana, and then run this for a huge boost to armor. Couple this with an armor flask, and you're going to get a huge increase in physical damage reduction. Now that covers off the defensive layers. I know it was a bit of a lecture, but I didn't want to just tell you what's going to happen. I wanted to show you each layer of defense and how it works. I think I've got it right in the order on how it works. If I've not got that correct, then obviously please correct me. But that's how we're dealing with defenses in 3.16. What it means for the life cycle of the build in terms of leveling to get to maps and then to endgame, there might be a portion when you're at yellow to red maps where you do start to feel a little bit squishy, but by then you should be maybe only level 85 and the odd death is not really going to affect your progress. Once you can then get a lot of the gear, get your fizz taken as elemental, get all your block, you're going to be really, really tanky, and you should be able to do all the content on a fairly minimum investment. So that covers off the defenses. We'll now move on and just look at a few of the new bits of the tree that we've decided to pick up in this build. So regarding the skill tree, we're going to have to do this in Path of Building because we don't have the skill tree in the game yet. This path for building is in the video description. It's got act by act leveling and how you want your tree to look, along with what you want it to look like at Uber Lab and beyond. I'll just pull out a few sections of the tree. There's not really much to go through. A lot of this will seem similar to people that have played Lightning Strike before. So we have the life nodes here, we have the crit nodes, we have a really good place to put a lethal pride jewel. So I'll just pull out the differences. The claw nodes slightly changed in that you have to take masteries rather than all of the bits that we get being included within the nodes. So you see from the claw nodes, you literally just get attack speed all the way out there, and then all the way up here, you get crit chance and crit multi. And then you have masteries, which you can select, and there's various ones you can select here. So we picked 2 claw nodes up, and you're going to have to make a decision as to what notables you want. We do need to take mana and life leech, which we take in the claw wheel that we'll go to in a minute. So here you either want blind for extra evasion, or you can take elusive effect. Elusive effect I don't feel does that much because we don't know how high an effect we're going to have at the time we get hit. So I like to have blind, but you could have elusive effect there if you wanted. And then in the claw mastery up here, we're going to take attack, damage, leech as life and mana. In fact, you probably want to swap these around because we pick up this node first. And that's much more handy leveling than blind. You'll see we path through life here, and again we take another mastery, which I don't know if it's good yet, but we are low on life, so I've taken the risk, which is 10% increased life, but 10% reduced recovery of life rate. And life rate affects everything from, leech, regen, recovery is pretty much everything. But we should still have plenty to get through even with the minus 10%. This is a new section, we've never been here before. The reason being is this is charisma. It's also got a reservation mastery, which is really good. We get a lot of increased mana reservation efficiency from this. Going over to life and evasion, we can also take a mastery that gives grace increased mana reservation efficiency. All in all combined, it means we can run 2 50% auras and a precision and still have plenty of mana left over to attack, cast curses and that sort of thing. Before we move down the bottom of the tree, this is a spell suppression wheel, which we have to take to max out suppress spell damage. And in here, there is a mastery, which is amazing, which is critical strike chance is increased by a chance to suppress spell damage. 100% is 100% critical strike chance. So as you can see from the POB, if we removed it, that's 10% of our DPS. So that is a huge mastery. We go down here. This node's changed slightly, but it's basically our Ellie attack node. Oh, and I forgot this node hidden over here is our Ellie pen nodes. The notables aren't very good for the elemental ones though, so I haven't taken them. It's something you could consider taking while leveling because you can get resistances. Here, these are mandatory at the moment because we don't know what sort of suppression we're going to get on gear, but this is just to cap out our suppression. The notable is really good here again though, which is an extra 10% suppressed spell damage if you've got evasion on your boots, helmet and gloves, which we will have. So to get rid of this node, it's 4%, 10%, and then another 10%. If we had 24% on gear, we can drop these 3 nodes. Here we pick up life and we also pick up ailment avoidance, which we're going to need. As usual, take point blank, go down into marked for death because this calls enemies that are marked. And here's the bit where it changes. So before, we never had to take any of these nodes because we didn't need the defense. But if we take all these nodes just with a bit of block on shield and chest, we can get block capped. And that's all these nodes are, they're block. We also need the mastery here because it's 20% to avoid elemental ailments while holding a shield, which means we'll have a total from our Ascendancy, this and the life wheel of 90%. So we only have to find 10% on either some harvest, crafted or corrupted jewels, or just a chest piece, shield or boots. And then with your last remaining points, you're going to go up, take a frenzy charge, you're going to take a jewel socket, and you're going to take life. This jewel socket, I plan to put in a very large thread of hope because then I can take min frenzy charges and increase damage per frenzy charge. And just as importantly, minimum endurance charge and endurance charge on kill. This is going to add some much needed physical damage reduction because we have very little. But I'll untick that for now because that's going to be an end game thing. And that's what the tree looks like. I won't spend any more time on it. POB will be in the video description, so we'll move on from there and on to the next section of the guide. So we're now going to move on to gear. This is quite difficult to know what to do because we don't know some of the attributes that we're going to get on gear. So I think it's probably easier to direct you to the written guide to look at endgame gear, or the Path of Building has got all the gear that I used in 3.15. You can check it out because I imagine endgame gear is not going to change too much. I really want to talk about in the league start scenario, what do you have to do to get this build to red maps? There is a series on my channel, which I will link in the video, which is me going SSF, Vol Lightning Strike, getting to T16 maps within 24 hours, and then Cirrus was down within 2 days. It was all SSF, no trade, so it's 100% viable. It's going to take a bit longer this time around, I would think, because we don't just have the option of picking 5 nodes to get all our defense. But as you can see from the DPS numbers, we don't need to get a lot of damage numbers to actually clear the content. The reason being is that you would, for most bosses, you're going to get this as your melee damage. You're going to get this as your projectile damage, so that's 500k. You're then going to have 2 Vol Lightning Strikes to pump out, which again is a decent chunk of damage. So you're talking on this gear, even though when you look at just the Lightning Strike melee damage, you think, oh, 225k, that's like Z DPS. It's not. It clears all the bosses. They don't melt instantly, but they die within a few seconds. And with all the defenses we've got, we're going to have the luxury of being able to stand in place against normal map bosses. So what we'll do is just go on to the gear, and I'll just run through what I had, and it's nothing special. In trade, I would think this would cost you about 40c in its entirety. So the claw we crafted, the way you want to look to craft a claw is any essence, and remember it's on the map device for 2 chaos. You want fire damage to weapon essences, lightning damage, cold damage, crit, or attack speed. Any of those 5 essences, quality a claw up, use your essence on your claw and see what you get. Ideally, you just really need 24 to 25% attack speed and some crit chance, and then you craft elemental damage onto the claw, whatever your crafting bench has access to that has the highest damage. And this claw saw me through to T16 maps pretty comfortably. Got to remember, because with the attack speed of 7 attacks per second, and we're getting 46 life gained per hit, plus our leech, we almost instantly heal when we take damage. Going on to the shield, again, this is nothing special. You just need life and resistances. In 3.16, we're going to get much higher numbers of block and suppression on a shield, so look for that. End game, you're going to be going Shaper because you want plus maximum resistances, but it's not needed until you start getting further on into the league. The helmet, didn't have an enchant, didn't even have a good helmet. It's got nothing going for it other than half decent life and crafted resistance. The 6th link I found as a drop when farming the invasion bosses. I just used some life essences on this until I had something that was, it's not even half decent. Again, this is crap SSF gear that everyone should be able to have access to. Osgharm Nubuck gloves, I just wore these because they dropped and it was a way of getting Assassin's Mark. I wouldn't recommend it because the life's quite low and you lose Chaos Res. So you're better off with a rare pair of gloves there. Then what you're looking for is item level 80 Hunter gloves. You then want to alteration spam it until you get +1 strikes. And then you will augment Regal and craft on it. And that will be your gloves to see you through for the first week of the league. For boots, we just want resistances, life and movement speeds. All you need at the beginning. Amulet, you're going to try, really, you want to pick up some attributes. So this has piercing shots on it because this was something I got from Rog, I believe. If you don't have piercing shots, all it means is that you need to allocate these nodes on the tree because you're going to need some pierce if you don't have your enchant. That's all covered in the POB anyway. So for this amulet, again, it's just life, resistances, a few attributes, and then some lightning damage to attacks crafted on. If you do end up with open prefixes on gear, and it's already got life on it, craft some LE damage on it. We've got rings. Again, it's just covering attributes, resistances, and life. This one's got a few individual LE damage to attacks, but you know, this is a ring that you would find on the floor in your first few hours of mapping. I always go for a heavy belt because I find that the build lacks strength. So you just want a belt with strength and loads of life, and if you can, resistances. And that's it. That's the gear that I'm basically farming T16 maps with. The reason we're able to do it is because of all the pierce we get from all the lightning. We never get hit because everything dies pretty much before they get a chance to hit you. Defenses have obviously taken a hit but I wasn't exactly stacked on this character anyway. I didn't really have much evasion. I just had blind and I had some dodge. So obviously it was safer before because we had dodge and we had blind. But as you go through the build, you're going to be building up your defenses as you go along. You should hit maps with a decent amount of evasion. We're going to have some block. We're going to have some spell suppression. We're going to have lots of different things to help us through maps. And in another SSF run I didn't take any defensive nodes at all. I didn't take any dodge. I didn't take any evasion. I had 4k life. I took the odd death, but you can still get through to yellow maps on basically nothing. So what we'll do now, that covers the gear I had when I hit red maps. Just going to go into Path of Exile and just show you this character. Now, the time played is not accurate because I kind of went AFK for ages on this character, but this is 3 days, 8 hours. This is the same character as you've just seen the POB for, and this was farming, as I said, T16 maps after 24 hours, and it was Cirrus A8 within 48. This again was SSF, didn't do any trading. This is all gear I've either crafted or found. So what we'll do again is just run through the gear that I had. In fact, even though it's not going to be representative because of dodge, let's run a map and I'll show you how it performs. There's quite a lot of damage on that, but it should be fine. I just hope I haven't moved anything because I migrated this character over to standard to clear my Atlas. So hopefully it should be okay. So because we are striking additional targets, very difficult to stuff that actually hit us. And with the defenses we're going to have in 3.16, they're not going to hit us very often. So again, just hold it, kill the map. We get all my map completions over there. So we'll just run through and we'll finish them out. And this is SSF gear in a couple of days. In trade, you could have this gear end of day one, no problem if you played a lot. We'll get out this map and then go through the gear. So that was an SSF character, a couple of days played through T16 maps, no problem. So the gear we had, we've obviously improved on our original gear. Not that much difference, to be fair. This one dropped with decent LE damage and crit and attack speed. So I crafted LE pen to make use of that damage. We also found a harvest craft for LE damage, which we used as well. So that adds a lot of DPS onto the claw. We've still not found an enchant, but we did find a Redeemer helmet, which we were able to get Fizz taken as cold, and then some life. Shield, we didn't find our plus LE damage shield because it's a bit more difficult in SSF, but we have one with lots of life and loads of resistances. 6 link, we haven't really changed. We just added some dodge to spell hits, which in 3.16 we would craft block. And again, this is just life and resistances. Still using the piercing shot amulet because we still haven't found the enchantment for the helmet. And again, this is just life. And I'm not sure why I've put non-channeling costs on there. That doesn't really need to be on there. Ring, life and resistances, life and resistances. Boots, I think these are the ones we had before or similar, just life, resistances, movement speed. Same belt. And these are the self-crafted gloves. So this is kind of what your gloves are going to look like when you crafted them, because you're really at the hands of RNG as to what your 2 mods are. And then you can craft one on. You're always going to be able to craft either life or resistances because a regaled item is not going to have 3 suffixes or 3 prefixes. It's going to have 2 and 1. And then just some bog standard flasks. So that's kind of how you want to gear. It's literally all about the claw, this glove here, and then getting enough life and resistances and defense to not get one shot. I'm not going to go through endgame gear because that's in the written guide, and also I think it might change by the time I've played for a few days and realise what's possible. We'll bring out a separate guide covering off the gear. So for now, we'll move on to the next section of the video. Actually, before we do, last thing to note, because we're going to be now going as an evasion character, all your bases want to be pure evasion. Cluster jewels we've completely dropped from the setup because we had to drop them to get our defenses in order. Also, the main jewel that we used was the coal curse jewel, and that's been removed. So all we would be doing for cluster jewels is stacking some crit, which we get enough from anyway. And then the last bit to move on to in terms of gear is the jewels itself. We're going to use a lethal pride jewel as usual, and it's going to slot in its normal position. So this is the old tree. By the looks of it, yeah, it's the old tree, but it slots in the same place. And all it does is puts notables or stats onto the notables that you've taken. To change it, you just divine it, stick it back in the slot and see what you've got. So for the lethal pride jewel, what you're looking for is intimidate on hit, chance to deal double damage, percentage life, and physical damage taken as fire. If you can get a combination of intimidate and deal double damage, that's a really massive DPS boost. Or if you compare physical damage taken as fire with either double damage or intimidate, that's a really good sort of medium of defensive and attack. If you've got space in your tree for other jewels, you're looking for just standard stats like life, crit multi with lightning skills, crit multi with elemental skills, or attack speed with a shield, a claw, or a one-handed weapon. Any mix will do. I think it's also possible to harvest craft avoidance onto jewels, so you might be able to put your missing 10% on here, or either through a corruption, but that should be easy enough to pick up on gear. And that covers off the gear of the build. Build's getting really big and the guide's getting really long, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So we'll disappear out of here. I'll quickly cover off Pantheons, Ascendancies, and anything I've missed, and then we'll close up the guide. So before I close off the guide, we're going to look at Pantheons, we're going to look at Flasks, we're going to look at Bandits, and we're going to look at Ascendancy order. So we're going to start with Pantheons. These aren't updated in Path of Building yet, so we're going to have to go to the forum and read through the Pantheons. A lot of these aren't going to be relevant to us, even though they're really, really good changes, because we're going to be immune to ailments. And I think you really want to pick the Pantheon that the map might dictate. So if you go in a poison map, you might take Soul of Shikari. I think I'm going to run around with Soul of Ralakesh because it grants moving while bleeding doesn't cause you to take damage. We don't have really any physical damage mitigation, so bleed is actually something we need to be quite worried about. It's also going to help when you're running through lab. So that's what I'm gonna have as my minor. The other option, which is really, really good, is Ugal, which gives you 30% reduced effect curses. We also take 50% reduced reflected damage. What you can do is use this combined with one of the new masteries, and you can become 100% immune to reflected damage. So it's an easy way to run at Zeri, whereas before you had to juggle around with gear and ascendancies. For bandits, we're killing all. There's not really any need to do anything else. Normally when leveling, I sometimes take Alira, but I will explain why we're not when we move on to our ascendancy. So this is what your final ascendancy will look like. I think end game, when we're like weeks into the league and everyone's got stacked gear, you probably might spec out of all of these because you get everything from the tree or gear, and then you'd go into onslaught and increased onslaught effect. For now, I think this is the best ascendancy to use. In terms of order, this is what I actually do. I go rapid assault first because when you're leveling it massively helps. I'll then go and take the frenzy charge nodes. I'll then take spell suppression. For Uberlab, I will then take phasing. Then when I've got all of those, I'll spec out of onslaught and I'll go into the extra frenzy charge damage. As I say, end game, I think you probably want to spec back into these, but this is more damage than running the onslaught nodes when you don't have amazing gear. And then lastly, we're just going to move on to the flasks. There's not really much to show flask-wise because we cover our ailments anyway. I don't run a Quicksilver flask as I feel that Whirling Blades, we don't really need any more movement speed than what that provides. So I run a Jade flask for extra evasion, and I would try and get the evasion suffix as well. So it just gives us a massive boost when combined with all our other evasion. Silver flask for onslaught. Suffix is up to you. Run something like, poison, or you can run increased movement speed, attack speed, whatever you want to run as your suffix. I'll run an Zeri's Promise for some Chaos Res and a bit of extra damage. I'll run the bog standard Bleeding Life Flask. And then the fifth one is really optional. I think you have to run Jade, you have to run Onslaught, that Zeri's helps with Chaos, and you need a Life Flask. I'll run a Sulphur Flask as the last one, but it's really up to you. If you want to run a different flask, you're fine too. I don't think it makes too much of a difference. So apologies, it's kind of gone downhill quality-wise from the beginning of the guide, but I wasn't going to get it out in time, and I'd rather just whiz through the bits that really are not I wouldn't say they're not important, but they don't need explaining, whereas defense part really needed explaining. So that covers off this section of the build. We'll move on to the last bit, which is really just concluding and closing off the build. I knew I would forget something before we close out the video, and it's quite a big thing, and that's curses. You're going to get curses as mods on maps, and you're going to get curses when you're in a map. It seems that when you get to red maps, a curse rolls on nearly every map, so you need a way to try and deal with or at least lessen the effect of those curses. You've got two options. I would personally run a second ring once I've got my currency up, because you can craft effective curses on a ring and it can be up to 25%. I would then, for those maps, take the Ugal Pantheon, and that would give me 55% reduced effect of curses. That should be enough to see you through the maps and stop you getting one shot from vulnerability, and make it so that temp change doesn't just ruin the mapping experience. You could also, on top of that, run a cursed flask, because when you do get cursed, you want to remove it, but I would go with either or. I think stacking 55% reduced effect is the better option, because the cursed flasks do nothing against the mod that's on a map. It's not something I'm particularly going to worry about at the beginning of the game, and once Assassin's Mark rings get cheaper, I'm going to have a second ring with effective curses on it. The first one will have minimum endurance charges on it. I'm going to try and cover this off more once we're into the game and we can see what sort of effect the 55% has on curses. I can bring out an update in the written guide, but for now, they would be my two recommendations for dealing with curses. And now we are going to go on and close out the video. So that brings me to the end of the guide. I've covered everything I wanted to. Some of it's probably been more whistle stop than it should be, but the guide's already getting pretty lengthy. The idea is that once we're kind of a few days into the league and I can see how some of these mechanics that we're unsure of work and what gear is going to sit best with this character, I'll bring out another addition to the guide, which is really going to cover exactly what you want for endgame. There's lots and lots of material within the video description. There'll be the link to the written forum guide, which I'll respond to any questions that you might have. There'll be a link to the Path of Building, which has got a leveling section in there. There's also a link to a video where I level Raider with Spectral Helix. It was done in 3.15, but there's really not much has changed other than the skill tree. So you would just use that video alongside the skill tree in the up-to-date POB, and you should have a really smooth leveling and early mapping experience. I've probably missed something off. I always do with these guides. I always miss something off obvious. Either post it in the comments of the video or come and hit me up and find me on the forum guide and I'll let you know. If I've missed something absolutely huge and fundamental, then I'll bring out a little extra video to add it in. But for now, hope you all have an amazing league start. Really looking forward to Scourge to see what sort of gear we can get out of the mechanic. As always, take care and see you in the next video.